Hi guys, today we're looking at some of the themes found in Macbeth by William Shakespeare. We are focusing on evil and disease. So let's look at evil first. Evil is a major theme in this play. The theme of evil is introduced from the very start. It's there on page 1 when we meet the witches and they mention Macbeth. Now the fact that the witches mention Macbeth means that he is associated with evil, so he has the capacity for evil. Evil is further seen in the actions of Lady Macbeth, who asks for spirits to take all that is good away from her, and then the subsequent plan to kill King Duncan. Without Macbeth and his wife's capacity for evil, the witches would not have been able to manipulate them into killing the king, and then creating the chaos that follows. So let's look at the specific instances of evil. First, in Act 1, Scene 1 on page 1, right from the start. The witches gather in a storm, establishing the first image of evil. Now, why a storm? Because then they can remain hidden. So the fact that they are meeting in this weird weather conditions also shows something is up. They can't necessarily be trusted. And then, like I said, mentioning Macbeth associates him with evil, shows he has the capacity to be evil too. In scene 3 on page 4, evil starts to take on a more definite form. The spiteful attitude of the witches is shown when they talk about the sailor that they are going to torture because his wife did not want to share her food with one of the witches. They are spiteful and vindictive. Scene 5 on page 14, Macbeth is shown to have the capacity for evil, because when he hears that Malcolm is heir to the throne, he says he has black and deep desires, but he also says, "Stars hide your fires, let not light show my black and deep desires." So he knows this is a bad thought, and he wants to keep it hidden. On page 15, Lady Macbeth immediately shows a lack of moral conscience. On page 16, she calls upon evil spirits to take away her kindness. And then on page 17, Macbeth's own ambition makes him open to persuasion by his wife. Lady Macbeth doesn't even think about it. She reads the letter and goes like, "Oh, King, he's a little too good to do this the way it should be. Let me just ask the spirits to make me capable of killing." So Lady Macbeth is terrifying, and then Macbeth, if he didn't have the capacity for evil, he would not have been able, or she would not have been able to manipulate him like this. In scene 7 on page 22, we see that Lady Macbeth's speeches are full of violence and evil. If we look at the diction she uses, it's terrifying. She says she would rather tear a baby from her breast and dash its brains out on the floor than break a promise she made to Macbeth. And she gets very graphic and descriptive about this. She doesn't say, "I would rather kill a child than break a promise." She specifically says, "I would rather dash its brains out on the floor." That's very violent and unnecessary. In Act 2, Scene 2 on page 29, Macbeth cannot say Amen after giving in to evil and killing Duncan. Then in Act 3, Scene 1 on page 47, Macbeth meets with murderers to have Banquo killed. Now, we can see Macbeth's moral conscience deteriorating, because at first he was very hesitant when it came to killing. But now he's kind of fine with it. He just wants someone to do the dirty work for him. He doesn't even need his wife's influence to be a murderer anymore. In Act 4, Scene 1 on page 66, Macbeth starts depending more on the witches, darkening his heart even further. In Scene 3 on page 76, Macbeth's evil nature takes over when he kills an innocent woman and her child, for no reason. Yes, he had an issue with Macduff. Lady Macduff and her child had nothing to do with it. He killed them because he was spiteful. He killed them because he couldn't find Macduff, and he was frustrated. This all from a guy who didn't want to kill at the start of the play. In Act 5, Scene 5 on page 96, unable to live with what they had done, Lady Macbeth commits suicide. This is the result of the evil deeds that they committed. She can't cope. So we see a complete switch in the two characters here. At first, Macbeth was the one who felt guilty, was the one who hesitated, and Lady Macbeth just went for it. But the more evil he became, the less able she was to cope with everything. The next theme we'll look at is disease. Now, throughout the play, many images of sickness and physical disease are used to emphasize the moral corruption of Macbeth and the result thereof on the country. In Act 1, Scene 7 on page 21, Lady Macbeth asks, "Was the hope drunk wherein you dressed yourself?" And then she refers to the hope as looking green and pale. And this sort of gives you the idea of a hangover. When someone is drunk, they tend to make very bold promises. And then the next morning, it's not only the headache and the dehydration, but also them feeling of, oh, what have I done? And she tells Macbeth, but this is what you are like. You were like a drunk man, and now you are like someone hung over and sick. She thinks something is wrong with Macbeth for not wanting to kill Duncan. Then in Act 2, Scene 1, page 26, Macbeth hallucinates a dagger and mentions a heat-oppressed brain. And this refers to a feverishly excited mind. When you have a really, really high fever, you can sometimes hallucinate and sort of become confused about what reality is. Here we see Macbeth is not thinking straight. Ambition is driving him insane, and the audience can very clearly see something is wrong with him. In Act 3, Scene 1, on page 47, who were our health perfect, blah, blah, blah. Here we see Macbeth believes that as long as Banquo is alive, Macbeth will be sick. He will only be healthy once Banquo is dead. Now, this is particularly sad because these two were best friends. Macbeth and Banquo were together in the war, and they were together when they met the witches. But as much as this showed their friendship, this also dooms Banquo because he knows too much. He heard the prophecy. So Macbeth realizes because Banquo knows too much, he puts him at risk. In Scene 4 on page 55, after Banquo's death, Macbeth hallucinates again, seeing Banquo's ghost. Now, hallucinating is not a sign of a healthy mind. Act 4, Scene 1, page 72, Macbeth calls the air accompanying the witches infected. So he knows nothing good can come from the witches. He knows that what's going on is sick, but he trusts them and works with them because he is just as sick as they are at this point. Then Act 5, Scene 1, page 86. The doctor appears. And this is kind of ironic because throughout the whole play we've seen really, really sick acts and we've seen hallucinations and we've seen that both Macbeth and Lady Macbeth are going out of their minds. But now for the first time we see a doctor. Why? Because Lady Macbeth is sleepwalking. But not only that. While sleepwalking, she talks about what they had done. So now she is becoming a risk for Macbeth. Her sleepwalking is described as a disease, and the doctor claims he can't help her. On Scene 3, page 93, the doctor tells that to Macbeth. He says, "I can't help your wife. This is not a sickness of the body, this is a sickness of the mind. And she needs to figure out what's going on and solve this herself. But she can't be absolved, because absolving herself and repenting and admitting what they had done would kill her anyway." So what does she do? She kills herself. And as you know, their relationship by this point had become so sick and had deteriorated so much that Macbeth's reaction is sort of, her timing sucks, she should have died tomorrow. I hope these themes make sense. You are welcome to ask anything if you are still confused.